Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into the low-lit interior of an igloo. Yes, a real one, with thick blocks of snow insulating the walls and a flickering oil lamp making everything shimmer. The night outside is vast, slow, and deeply silent, but inside, you're surrounded by warmth, layers of caribou skin, and the gentle hush of people waiting for a story to begin. This isn't a cozy book nook or some storytime app. It's something far older, something colder, and somehow infinitely more human. And by the way, if you're imagining you'd survive long without the warmth of others, or the warmth of stories, you wouldn't. These tales didn't just help pass the time, they helped people outlast time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere snowy or unusually warm, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where these sleepy journeys land. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by ducking through the low, rounded entrance of a snow-packed home that feels smaller on the outside than it is within. Inside, the ceiling curves gently, rounded and serene. It glows faintly from a kulik, a stone lamp burning seal oil that fills the room with a soft amber flicker. You brush snow from your coat and settle onto a fur-lined seat. Around you, others are doing the same. It's quiet. Not awkwardly quiet, but attentively quiet. A quiet that says everyone knows what's coming. Everyone knows it's time. Someone clears their throat. Someone older. Eyes rimmed with laugh lines and half moons of experience. They look around the circle, smile just a little, and begin, not with a preamble, but with the story itself. No title, no once upon a time. Just a voice drifting into the room like snow falling sideways. This is how long winter nights always began in traditional Inuit communities. Not with formal announcements or grand entrances, but with a voice that simply began to shape the dark into something softer. The Arctic winter is not a passive backdrop. It stretches for weeks, even months, with only a few hours of light, or none at all. The cold outside is not metaphorical. It can crack bone and silence breath. But the interior of an igloo, or later, a sod house, was layered in furs and voices. Families didn't just sit huddled for warmth. They leaned in together for the spark of a well-told tale, one that could take the wind's sting and turn it into a whispered punchline or a warning dressed in legend. Mainstream historians often emphasize survival tools, kayaks, harpoons, snow goggles, but just as essential was the tool of narration. A good story could stitch together the evening. A great one could explain why the sun hadn't come back yet, and why that was okay. Not every story was cheerful. Some were a bit unsettling, but even those had purpose. They trained listeners to sit with discomfort, to interpret dreams, to respect boundaries. You might hear about a woman who marries a dog, or a hunter who becomes a seal, and you'd understand without being told outright that choices carry weight, and transformation is always near. You shift slightly, fur crackling softly beneath you, and notice that there's no interruption. No one checks a watch. No one needs to. The pacing is set by voice, not by time. If the tale stretches long into the night, so be it. The storyteller will carry you through it. You begin to understand that there's a rhythm here, one that replaces the tick of clocks or the hum of electric heaters. It's a rhythm shaped by breath, pause, and presence, and unlike modern entertainment, you're not being entertained at. You're part of the shape the story takes. Even children sit still, not because they're forced, but because missing a moment might mean missing the lesson or the joke. Inuit children didn't grow up reading fables and books. They grew up memorizing cadences, mimicking sound effects, and learning when to laugh without interrupting. They were trained by listening, trained by immersion, trained to trust what a story might be saying just under the surface. Fringe anthropological accounts from early Western explorers often noted how long a single story could go. Some claimed tales lasted several nights. Others swore the same tale could be retold 10 different ways, depending on who asked and who answered. And while historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated or misunderstood, what's clear is this: these stories weren't filler, they were fiber. They stitched communities together in the long, cold dark. Even now, you're not entirely sure where the story ends and your own imagining begins. The elder's voice dips low, describing a fox that steals fire, and for a moment you swear the shadows on the wall flicker in time with the trickster's footsteps. Someone lets out a slow exhale, part sigh, part laugh. Another voice, younger, picks up the next part of the tale. You hadn't even realized there would be more than one storyteller tonight. There's no applause, no bravo, just the seamless continuation of sound in a space that knows how to listen. And just like that, you forget the cold outside. You forget the absence of sun. You forget that this is supposed to be harsh living. It doesn't feel harsh now. It feels whole. It feels enough. The light in the igloo sways ever so slightly, not because anyone moved it, but because the lamp itself is alive, its flame curling from a stone bowl shaped by hands who knew it by heart. That's a kulik, by the way. It burns seal oil and floats a small wick made of moss or Arctic cotton. Its heat is modest, but in a tightly built igloo, it's everything: warmth, light, and during long nights like these, ambiance. You sit a little deeper into your spot, your knees tucked close, the walls are curved around you like a snow dome cocoon. You might expect your breath to cloud the air, but it doesn't. Not in here. The heat's holding well, trapped by the clever insulation of snow and skins. Around you are others, family, neighbors, maybe a traveler or two, or someone who wandered in to share a seal haunch and stayed for the gossip. The social setup is intimate but loose. The youngest ones are curled in laps or draped across thighs. The elders sit upright, already shifting the space just by their posture, and everyone else fills the circle like a seal herd at rest, warm, quiet, aware. Underneath you, possibly caribou hides, stitched with sinew and smoothed by long use. Beneath that, maybe a layer of willow branches, or even a low wooden platform lifted just enough to keep you off the packed snow floor. The igloo may look primitive to some, but in here, it's a masterpiece of function. Inuit homes were built for efficiency, yes, but also for community. And stories. Stories needed a setup like this. This arrangement wasn't accidental. It was engineered for listening. A dome reflects sound gently. The acoustics are round and even. The Kulik's light never quite reaches the farthest faces, so the storytelling becomes almost cinematic, shadowed, suggestive, intimate. A circle forms without instruction. The warmth gathers, and in the heart of this softly glowing structure, storytelling becomes more than words. It becomes shape, space, a shared act. You don't interrupt, you don't shift too loudly, and you absolutely don't steal focus from the one speaking unless you're a toddler or a dog. Then, apparently, the rules are different. The storyteller, let's say it's Anna, an older woman with a face mapped in creases, doesn't need props. Her gestures are minimal, but every time her voice rises or stretches a vowel, the children lean forward when she pauses. The adults smile knowingly, as if they've heard this tale before, but are still waiting to see which version she'll choose tonight. Some elders preferred using carved ivory figures to help pace a tale. Others used their hands, animating them as owls, bears, or human lovers turned to fish. Occasionally, a sealskin drum might accompany the story, not to provide rhythm, but emphasis. A beat after a punchline, a roll after a warning. Mainstream accounts often ignore this visual layer of Inuit storytelling, but in some regions, it mattered deeply. Historians still argue whether these performative elements were common or simply localized traditions misunderstood by early anthropologists. What's clearer is that the environment, the very way these homes were built, was never separate from the act of storytelling. They were interlocked. And then there's the smell. You hadn't expected that. There's a distinct scent of smoke and seal oil, softened by the earthy aroma of the furs. It's not unpleasant. It's anchoring. Every sense is involved now. Sight dimmed, hearing tuned, skin warmed, scent woven in, even taste, if you're lucky. Someone's passing around a sliver of frozen char or a chew of dried walrus meat. It's all part of the experience. You might assume these evenings had formal beginnings or obvious transitions, but they rarely did. A story would fade out, maybe with a joke, maybe with a caution. There'd be a moment of stillness. Then another voice would pick up, not as a sequel, just a new memory, a different tale, maybe a joke stretched into fable. And all of this happened with remarkable ease. No scripts, no planning, just generations of practice, quirky detail. Some Inuit storytellers could mimic animal calls so precisely that dogs listening nearby would sit up, alert, as if a fox had actually trotted into the igloo. In fact, children were sometimes taught to imitate these sounds as a game, only to realize later they were rehearsing entire narrative devices. You take a deep breath and look around again. One child is already asleep, mouth slightly open, cheek pressed into her grandmother's leg. Another blinks heavily, trying to resist. Adults seem to melt into the background. The story is doing its work, slowly quieting minds, warming backs, pushing the long winter night gently forward. This isn't a performance in the modern sense. It's participation. Each listener is expected to carry part of the tale forward, not by retelling it word for word, but by remembering its shape, its turning points, its rhythms. Someday, the child beside you will be the one telling this story, or maybe one of their own, for now. Though, you're just another warmth in the room, just another heartbeat joining the pulse of the voice. And outside, the wind howls against the snow walls, unheard. The story now drifts into its final sentence, a low hum of a closing line, spoken almost as an afterthought, and the circle rests in its silence. No one claps, no one comments. That isn't how things work here. You simply sit with it, like snow on tundra, like breath in still air. Then, after a beat, someone shifts, the firs rustle, and another voice begins. The next tale has arrived, but something's curious, and you begin to notice it. None of these stories are being written down. You look around the igloo. There are no paper scrolls, no charcoal markings on the walls, no tools of inscription, and yet the story is perfectly intact. No falters, no forgotten parts. You realize that here. Stories don't need ink or etching. They live in breath and memory. They exist because they're told, not despite it. Inuit storytelling was oral, not by default, but by design. There was never a widespread script created for it, and this wasn't a lack, it was a choice. Stories passed from mouth to ear stayed flexible, adaptable, and responsive. They could change with the mood, the weather, the audience, and they didn't fossilize the way ink on a page does. You may have heard the old academic complaint, if only they'd written these down, but maybe they didn't want to. Maybe the act of remembering and retelling was more important than immortalizing a version that might, one day, lose its shape in dust. Mainstream historians often describe oral cultures as pre-literate, but that term hides a subtle condescension. It implies they were simply waiting for pens to be invented. But Inuit oral traditions weren't holding out for literacy. They were rich, layered systems in their own right, systems where tone, pause, repetition, and gesture did what punctuation never could. Fringe linguistic studies even suggest that some tales contained cues for the listener to join in or respond at specific beats, not with words, but with sounds, breath, or movement, almost like a call and response, only quieter, shared, not shouted. So, yes, these stories were never written down, but they were inscribed in 100 other ways in the cadence of an elder's breath, in the mimicry of a child practicing in private, in the rhythm of a community preparing to face another endless dusk. One reason for this flexibility: some stories weren't allowed to be repeated verbatim. That was considered disrespectful. You were meant to inhabit the tale, not clone it. You could borrow the bones, but the telling had to be your own. It had to breathe. Take, for instance, the tale of the sun and the moon, siblings caught in a chase that plays out across the Arctic sky. There are dozens of versions across Inuit communities. In one, the moon wrongs the sun. In another, it's the other way around. Sometimes it's jealousy, sometimes curiosity, but always the same result: the celestial chase, light and shadow in eternal motion. And historians still argue whether this tale originated as cosmology, entertainment, or coded moral instruction. Was it to explain the passage of time, a metaphor for sibling tension, a reflection of lunar hunting cycles? Probably yes. To all of it, and maybe none of it. That's the beauty of oral narrative. Ambiguity isn't a flaw, it's a feature in many communities. These tales could only be told in certain seasons, especially winter. Summer was too full of activity, too exposed. But winter invited stories the way an empty bowl invites soup. You were indoors longer, closer to others, and more in need of something that fed the mind without draining the food stores. So you waited. You prepared, and when it was time, the story wasn't just recited, it was performed, shaped, lived. You wonder, sitting there, whether a written version would have ever felt as alive. Would a printed raven feel as tricksterish? Would a typed sea goddess ripple like she does now, rising from the shadows of the lamp? Her hair tangled with kelp and stars? Probably not. And even if someone had written it down, who would have read it? Traditional Inuit life didn't leave time for idle reading. You had to hunt, sew, fix, prepare, repair, mend, observe. Listening to stories fit into the work. It didn't take time from it. Now the voice pauses again. Another tale is complete. Someone chuckles softly, maybe at the ending, maybe just at the relief of a good memory stirred. And that's the other thing memory here isn't about detail. It's about spirit. You remember the feeling the story left in your chest. That's what you pass on. So no, there are no books, no parchments, no anthologies, but in this moment, wrapped in warmth, surrounded by nods and silence and the soft hush of seal oil burning low. You understand that stories live just fine without paper. They only need people. You don't realize when the next story begins. It just arrives, like a snowfall that starts without warning, soft and unannounced, until you're waist deep in it. The storyteller doesn't raise their voice. They simply start shaping a sentence, and everyone else leans in again. This one begins with a raven, not a metaphorical raven, a raven. One who talks, one who schemes, one who makes you laugh before you realize you're being taught something you probably needed to hear. The raven is a staple of Inuit storytelling. He's clever, yes, but not always wise. He causes trouble, takes shortcuts, and outsmarts others until he doesn't. Sometimes he wins. Sometimes he flies directly into his own downfall. But either way, you can't look away. You listen as this raven tricks a hunter out of his catch by pretending to be an elder in distress. Later, the same raven ends up stuck inside a whale's ribcage after trying to steal fire. You're not sure which part's funnier, the theft or the consequence, but the timing is perfect. A slight pause before the punchline, a rustle of laughter, the sound of someone shaking their head knowingly. Mainstream tellings often scrub stories like these of their oddities, polishing them into myths with beginnings, middles, and ends. But in the original versions, things veer off track, characters shift shape, events loop, motivations wobble, and that's the point. The world isn't tidy, neither are ravens. Soon the raven gives way to another figure, a woman with long black hair who vanishes into the sea. Not metaphorically, she becomes part of it. She is the sea, Sedna, or Nuliajuk, depending on who's telling the tale, a goddess or a victim, a protector or a warning. Her story changed with the voice that carries it. In one version, her fingers are cut off and become sea animals. In another, she drowns by choice. In still another, she simply walks into the water and turns into tide. Historians still argue whether Sedna is a singular myth or a composite figure, stitched from many stories told across regions and generations. What's certain is that she's never gentle. She demands respect. Disrespect the animals you hunt, and she'll withhold them. Disrespect the sea, and she'll churn it until your kayak splinters. There's a soft intake of breath in the room when the storyteller mentions her name, even now. Sedna stories carry weight. You don't joke about her, not exactly. You honor her, even while trying to understand her. Then there's Kalapalik, the one you didn't expect. You feel a slight chill as the storyteller describes her green skin, long fingernails, and parka that rustles like seaweed. She lives under the ice. She waits for disobedient children. She doesn't scold, she takes. The kids in the room sit a little straighter. No one dares laugh. But you notice something subtle. The story isn't cruel. Kalupalik isn't some wicked witch. She's a reminder, a shape, a way to talk about danger without saying. The ice is thin, and you might die. Quirky detail in some communities. Children would be warned that Kalupalik collects naughty noises, that if you complained too much, she'd hear it. A story designed to keep volume down in confined spaces where silence meant survival. And it worked. You don't need lectures when you have monsters, especially ones that wear fur-lined boots and whisper beneath the floor. It's not all fear and consequence, though. A moment later, a giant owl makes an appearance. It steals things, then loses them. Or maybe it gives advice. Or maybe it's the grandmother of stars. It's hard to say. The story weaves so casually into itself that you forget where it started. And then there's the shape-shifting wife, a woman who marries a man, then slowly reveals she's not a woman at all, but a fox, or a loon, or maybe the wind in disguise. He doesn't realize until he breaks the rules. Then she's gone, and you're left with the lesson: don't chase what you don't understand. Don't trap what's meant to be free. Don't assume. There's a laugh, not at the man, but at the universality of it. Everyone has loved something wild. Everyone has learned too late. These tales carry the landscape inside them. The sea is never just a sea. It's a character. The wind, it speaks. The animals, they have politics. Ravens squabble. Seals negotiate. Foxes deceive. Nothing is inert. That's one of the strange comforts of Inuit storytelling. The world is crowded, but not in a bad way. You're never truly alone, even in the middle of a whiteout. Something is watching. Something is thinking. And if you're lucky, something might forgive your mistake. Just this once, you look down at your hands. They're warmer now, not from the kulik, but from the quiet friction of listening. These stories don't ask for belief. They ask for attention. They don't want to be proven. They want to be held. So you do. You hold the raven, the goddess, the fox bride. You hold them in your mind, unsure where they'll go next, but knowing you'll follow. There's a shift now in the storyteller's tone. It's subtle, but you catch it. A new steadiness in their voice, a slight narrowing of the eyes. The tale that follows doesn't start with laughter. It begins with a long pause, the kind that makes the fire seem louder. The walls feel closer, and then the words fall, slow and precise. It's a story about being lost, not metaphorically, actually lost. A hunter, stranded during a sudden storm. Days pass, supplies run low. The wind howls so loud it drowns out his thoughts. But then, just as his hope begins to splinter, he meets a creature, not a man, not an animal, something in between. It doesn't rescue him. It doesn't speak. It just stands there, looking at him, until he finds the strength to stand up too. There's no grand ending, no triumphant return, just survival, quiet, stubborn, imperfect survival. You realize something important. Then Inuit stories often talk about fear, but they don't center it. Instead, they reframe it. They hand it to you in the shape of a fox, or a spirit, or a blizzard with breath. You're not told to banish fear, you're taught how to sit with it, talk to it, maybe even laugh a little with it. For children growing up in the Arctic, where isolation, hunger, and sudden danger were not abstract but daily possibilities, these stories were more than entertainment. They were emotional weatherproofing. If a child could hear about a sea goddess dragging a disobedient hunter into the depths and still fall asleep that night, they'd learned how to keep their panic in check. Modern psychologists might call it narrative exposure therapy, but the Inuit just called it evening. Take the tale of the man who eats his boots. It's ridiculous until it isn't. In one version, he's mocked for chewing on his own sealskin shoes after a long, unsuccessful hunt. In another, it saves his life. The punchline might be silly, but the lesson is deadly serious. Resourcefulness matters more than pride. Fringe variants of this tale even suggest that the boots weren't literal, but a stand in for eating last scraps of frozen fat or boiled moss, a way to prepare listeners for the unspoken truth you may need to survive something you don't want to talk about. And that's okay. Children, especially, absorbed these stories like snow absorbs footsteps, quietly, fully. The warning was there, but wrapped in humor, folded in fantasy, softened by animal masks. Historians still argue whether Inuit storytelling was consciously pedagogical or simply shaped by necessity. But the effect is the same. A child who heard tales about monsters stealing lazy hunters learned not to sleep in. A teenager who listened to the woman who became a bird learned to watch for shifting winds, not just in the weather, but in relationships. One clever tale describes a man who refuses to share food during a famine. He hides it, eats in secret, and mocks his neighbors. Then one day, he swells up like a seal and floats away, never to be seen again, depending on the telling. This is tragic, hilarious, or poetic justice, but the message lands in harsh places. Selfishness doesn't just make you unpopular, it makes you vulnerable. You sit back against the curve of the igloo wall, feeling the cold pressed away by the tightness of the circle. You glance around. No one's smirking. No one's rolling their eyes. These are old stories, but they haven't grown dusty. They're alive. And here's the quiet magic of it, because these tales use creatures and spirits and metaphors. They don't expire. A story about a bear who refuses to adapt isn't about bears. It's about your uncle who won't stop using a broken dog sled, or your cousin who won't listen to anyone, or maybe it stings a bit about you. You think back to the child curled on the floor, chin on her arms, eyes wide open. She's absorbing all of this, not to pass a test, not to recite it back later, just to hold it, somewhere, until the day she needs it. You notice, too, how these tales allow emotion to exist without judgment. A man can cry in a story and not lose honor. A woman can yell and be respected. A child can be afraid and still be brave. The world inside these stories mirrors the real one. It has snow and stars and hunger and love and silence. But unlike the real world, so here, everything means something. A crack in the ice could be just a crack, or the footstep of a spirit you failed to greet. A seal disappearing might be just bad luck, or the sea reminding you that you've grown arrogant. The ambiguity is comforting. It means you're never alone. It means there's always a lesson, even if you don't understand it right away. So, as the storyteller's voice fades again, and the circle breathes together in the hush that follows, you realize something else. These stories weren't there to explain away fear. They were there to contain it, to offer a bowl-shaped space where you could pour your worry and find it transformed. And tonight, it's working. The quiet lingers, like frost along the edge of a window. Then another voice stirs the air, not rushed, not dramatic, just a calm entry into the next tale. This one, you can already tell, is going to be a little different. You focus on the speaker. They don't move much. Their face stays still, their eyes only flicking from side to side occasionally. But their voice, that's where the real movement lives. It stretches wide, then narrows. It drops into whispers. It rises with mock outrage. And you begin to see this storyteller isn't just telling a story. They're performing a world. One voice, many roles. You lean forward a bit, and the illusion deepens. The voice has become an old man, gruff and slow. Then it's a girl, haughty and impatient. Then it's the wind, speaking in a rasp. Then silence, held just long enough to become suspense. Then, bam, a shout that makes someone laugh out loud. The whole room is spellbound. You realize it's not just the plot pulling people in, it's the delivery. In traditional Inuit storytelling, one person often performed every role. No stage, no props, just a single human being embodying multiple voices, characters, even animals. A shout becomes a polar bear. A sniff becomes a seal pup. A rasp becomes a jealous ghost. Mainstream records of Inuit narrative sometimes overlook this, the skill it took to move between voices with only the barest change in tone or breath. But it wasn't merely theatrical, it was necessary. You had to hold the story with your body, make it vivid, keep it alive without special effects or lighting cues. Fringe accounts, often dismissed at the time, tell of storytellers who could mimic whale songs so convincingly that children would cover their ears in surprise. Others claim the best among them could hold a full room silent for half an hour, with nothing but the rhythm of their voice, rising and falling like tide. And you believe it now. What surprises you, though, is how funny it is. Not laugh track funny, quiet room funny. The kind of humor that sneaks up, glances sideways, and lands with a smirk. You weren't expecting the old woman character to tell that joke about the lazy hunter who used his snow goggles as soup bowls. You definitely weren't expecting the bear to complain about being misidentified as a seal by a half-blind shaman. But here you are, giggling into your parka sleeve. It's this tonal agility, the way Inuit storytellers could slide between horror, reverence, absurdity, and instruction that makes these nights feel timeless. There's no genre boundary. You don't get funny story time followed by serious tale hour. You get a flow, a breathing arc, life, as told through voices. You watch how the storyteller uses rhythm. Pacing is everything. A long breath builds tension. A rapid-fire burst creates confusion. A pause, just the right pause, lets a phrase hang in the air like northern lights over dark snow. This is learned behavior, practiced, honed. Young listeners are taking mental notes. You can see it in how they lean forward when the voice deepens. They're tracking the character shifts, memorizing the sequence, prepping for a future night when they'll be asked to tell it. Because here, Storytelling isn't a solo act, it's a relay. You hold the story as long as you can, then pass it on before it goes stale. The story continues. The protagonist, a young man too proud to admit he's lost, refuses help from a mysterious stranger. The stranger turns out to be a spirit. The young man learns humility, but not before losing his mittens to a snow fox with a personal vendetta. It shouldn't work, but it does. The voice makes it work. You're transported. You think about what it takes to do this well memory. Of course, flexibility, but also courage to stand in a room and become a storm, or a sea goddess, or a quarrelsome seal. Take something modern storytelling rarely asks for vulnerability. You're offering yourself as the medium, not just the message. And you notice something else. The storyteller glances, just once, at the person next to them. A teenager? Maybe. That glance says everything. Watch me. You're next. Because the voice doesn't live forever, but the telling can. Historians still argue whether these performances had formal training, whether elders selected apprentices, or if it simply happened over time. But many agree that certain families became known for their tellers. Some even claim specific voices were inherited, like tools passed from parent to child. Not the exact tone, of course, but the cadence, the style, the way a pause holds breath just so. And now the tale is ending. The young man, humbled, returns home with fewer fingers, more sense, and a new story to share. The spirit, as always, vanishes without thanks, and the fox still out there, still watching. The voice drops low, then silence. Everyone sits with it for a moment. Then a single word from a voice in the back again. It's not a demand, it's a blessing. This time, the story comes from a younger voice, not a child. Exactly, but not yet old enough to command the room with a glance. They're learning, testing the rhythm. You can hear it in the way they start and stop, in the slightly uneven pace, in the quick glances to the elders to make sure they're still on track. But the room is patient. In fact, more than that, it's welcoming. Because here, storytelling isn't a performance you sit and judge. It's something you belong to. Everyone here has told stories. Everyone here has been told stories. It's not a ladder to climb. It's a circle to join. Tonight, the tale is simple. On the surface, a child who disobeys, wanders too far, gets caught in a snow squall, and is helped back home by a stranger. Only the stranger isn't a person. It's a ptarmigan. And the ptarmigan isn't just a bird. It speaks in riddles, cooks soup with snowflakes, and teaches the child to walk backward through the storm so it doesn't know it's afraid. That last bit, genius. You realize, mid-story, that you're hearing a lesson on emotional regulation. Disguise fear by pretending you're not afraid. Trick the panic by walking backward. Make the unknown seem like a return journey instead of a new one. Children learned these strategies not from lectures, but from birds. Inuit storytelling often taught through indirection. If you said, "Don't be scared," it didn't land. But if a snow bunting teaches you how to breathe slowly to avoid waking a frost giant, you'd remember that trick forever. Mainstream educational systems might file this under fable or folk wisdom, but that underplays its depth. These stories didn't just teach kids what to do, they taught them how to listen, how to hear the difference between a tale meant to amuse and a tale meant to warn. Fringe ethnographers in the early 20th century noted that Inuit children were often quiet, not because they were suppressed, but because they were absorbing. Listening was an active skill, taught through repetition and modeled by example. Children sat in circles from the moment they could stay upright, not because anyone forced them, because that's where life happened. You glance at the youngest listener now, barely old enough to walk. He's mouthing words silently as the story unfolds, as if rehearsing for a future moment when he'll be the one holding the room. It's not pressure, it's inheritance. The storyteller falters for a second, unsure of the next part. An elder quietly supplies the next phrase, not loud, not showy, just enough to guide the voice back on track. The rhythm continues. No one mocks, no one groans. Because this isn't about flawlessness, it's about flow. And that, too, is a lesson. These stories taught children more than myths. They taught how to speak, how to wait, how to pick up where someone left off without grabbing the spotlight, how to share attention and hold silence when it mattered. One story, now fading into memory, tells of a girl who refused to listen. She talked over elders, interrupted her cousins, tried to finish stories before they began. Eventually, she loses her voice in a dream and must travel across a frozen lake to recover it from a talking fish. The fish only speaks in questions, forcing her to listen with care. She returns home quieter, wiser, and in possession of a new tale to tell. You're sure this one gets told often, but not all stories were indirect. Some were boldly instructive. One tale describes a group of boys who laugh at an elder's limp that night. The moon tilts wrong, and the wind carries them far from camp. They return changed, not just apologetic, attentive from then on. They're the ones who carry wood, mend boots, sweep the snow off the roof. Their lesson was cosmic and immediate. Don't mock what you don't understand. Respect isn't earned through age, it's owed through empathy. Historians still debate whether these tales arose independently across villages or traveled between communities with migrating families. Some say story fragments found in eastern Nunavut match those in western Greenland, suggesting a vast, unrecorded network of oral exchange. Others argue these similarities reflect universal survival truths, meaning they arose naturally in places where ice and instinct shaped life equally. Either way, the stories spread, not through ink, not through formal schooling, through children, through evenings, through snow-covered homes and long, listening nights. The young storyteller now nears their ending. The ptarmigan flaps its wings, vanishes in a swirl of feathers, and the child arrives home, backward, of course, greeted by a mother who knew they'd make it. It's quiet afterward, not reverent, just peaceful, like the sound of snow settling after a wind. And that's the thing, when children learn to listen like this. They don't just absorb content, they absorb connection. They come to see stories as a way of being in the world, not separate from daily life, but stitched into it. So you sit there, awash in silence and flickering light, realizing that in this place, storytelling isn't extra. It's not a luxury, it's breath. The oil lamp flickers, sending long, slow-moving shadows across the curved wall. Someone shifts their weight, someone yawns softly, and then, without transition, a new story unfurls. It starts with a seal, not a cartoonish, clapping seal, but one with wise eyes and mournful breath, emerging from beneath the ice with a strange song humming in its throat. The seal speaks, but not in words. Its sound resonates in the bones of the hunter who hears it. He follows the melody, enchanted, until he finds a cave where no cave should be. Inside waits a woman with kelp for hair and questions that taste like salt when you answer them. You blink. Is this a story about seals or something else entirely in Inuit storytelling? It's often both. Tonight's tale is one of myth making, not in the grand, thunderbolt and destiny kind of way, but in the quiet. Why is that like this kind of way? Why are some seals darker than others? Why do northern lights make crackling sounds? Why does your uncle refuse to whistle at night? Each question has an answer, and each answer wears the costume of a story. You learn that some seals sing to guide lost souls, that the aurora borealis are the spirits of ancestors playing ball with a walrus skull, that whistling invites spirits to your door unless you offer them a seat first and a piece of dried fish. Fringe accounts mention that these stories evolved into folk science, observational truths wrapped in imaginative packaging. If you paid attention, you might catch seasonal changes encoded in the tale. A story about a migrating bird might cue you to the arrival of spring. One about angry wind spirits could signal a warning not to travel. Historians still argue whether these myths were ever truly believed in a literal sense, or if their value was always symbolic. Did people really think a talking seal taught you to sing, or was that simply a poetic truth, a way of giving voice to things the human mouth can't explain? But belief isn't binary here. You don't believe or disbelieve. You listen. You carry. You nod along when someone says. That's why we don't sleep with our feet facing the coast. You don't need to ask why in this current tale. The hunter begins to understand the seal's song. He mimics it, not perfectly. His voice cracks, and the cave woman laughs, but enough. And the lesson arrives gently. We only hear the world when we stop trying to talk over it. A line so elegant, you feel it land in your spine. You think, too, about the gaps these stories filled, gaps left by a lack of written science or mapped weather systems. Where did a storm come from? Why did someone vanish under the ice when they'd walked it 100 times before? What force rearranged the world without warning? The stories didn't erase these questions. They held them. They said, yes, we see that too. Let's give it shape. There's something generous about that. You're not left alone in confusion. You're invited into it. One elder once told of a dog who refused to enter the camp every night. He'd sit just at the edge, whining. Then one day, he walked into the snow and didn't come back that night. The family found their lost uncle in a dream. He said the dog had been carrying his memory, and once he'd delivered it, he could leave. A strange story, a sweet one, and maybe a little terrifying. But again, it's not about fact, it's about meaning. In a place where the world could vanish and white out within minutes, you needed something stronger than maps. You needed stories that echoed across generations, so that even if no one remembered the reason, they still followed the rule. Don't whistle at night. Don't sleep with your boots near your head. Don't mock the birds when they fly low. Some of these might sound like superstition, but others, they were practical. Boots too close to your face might bring mold. Whistling might attract predators or give away your location. Birds flying low often mean weather's coming in, wrapped in legend. These truths became memorable, lovable, even. And that's what you're feeling now, a kind of affection for the seal who teaches, for the bird who warns, for the story that doesn't need to make sense in order to feel right. The tale ends with the hunter returning to his camp, humming a tune that no one else can quite hear. But they see the difference in him. He walks more slowly, smiles more easily, listens more carefully. You watch the storyteller bow their head slightly, then fall quiet, and no one claps, no one speaks. But the room exhales in unison. That was a good one. You're starting to notice something unusual. It's not in the words or the characters. It's in the spaces between them. The longer you sit in this circle, the more you realize that silence is doing as much work as speech. The storyteller isn't in a rush. No one is. Between each phrase, there's a pause. Not dramatic, not uncomfortable, just enough to let the sentence settle like a snowflake on the mind. These silences aren't empty. They hum with intention. In Inuit storytelling, silence is a tool, not a gap. It tells you when to reflect, when to brace, when to breathe. In fact, some elders were known more for their timing than their tales. They'd wait so long between lines you'd forget what the story was about, until they dropped a single word that brought it all snapping back into focus. Fringe researchers once remarked that they'd sit through a 30-minute tale where half the time was silence, not because the speaker forgot what came next, but because they knew the silence was what came next. Tonight's tale leans into that rhythm. It begins with a boy who doesn't speak. He listens to everything: his parents, the wind, the ice underfoot. But he never speaks, not once, not until the day he's lost at sea and must sing a seal song to be rescued. The song, when it comes, is just one note, but it's perfect. You sit with that. A boy who says nothing, but hears everything. The silence in the story mirrors the silence in the room. Everyone's leaning in now, not physically, but mentally. You can feel the stillness deepen. A baby makes a sound, is gently hushed. Even the fire dims a little, as if it too is listening. Mainstream narratives often treat silence as a void, something to be filled. But here, it's a presence. It holds meaning. It gives permission for reflection. It allows you to feel something before being pulled to the next beat. There's a moment in the tale where the boy walks through a whiteout so thick, even sound vanishes. He taps his fingers on his coat just to remember he exists. That detail, a tapping boy alone in silence, somehow feels more human than a dozen lines of dialogue. Historians still argue whether these long pauses were intentional storytelling technique or simply a result of translation difficulties when tales were recorded. But those who've sat in the circle, like you, know better. This isn't a hesitation. It's punctuation in a language that breathes. There's a story you overheard earlier, one where an old woman paused so long. A child asked if she'd forgotten the ending. She smiled and replied, "The ending is still deciding if it wants to be told." Then she sat there for another minute before finishing the tale with one line. The fox stayed lonely. Nothing more, just that. And everyone in the room understood exactly what it meant. This pacing teaches more than plot. It teaches restraint, presence, the ability to wait. You're not being spoon-fed every detail. You're trusted to sit in the unknown, trusted to let the meaning unfold without flashing signs or bold letters. In one story, a young man is given advice by his grandmother: if your heart races, stop walking. If the ice speaks, answer with stillness. He doesn't understand it until he does. He finds himself standing on ice that sings, and he holds still long enough to realize it's not about fear. It's about attention. Quirky detail. Some Inuit hunters were known to pause mid-hunt, not for strategy, but to let the land speak. They'd wait for a bird call, a crack, even a change in wind breath before moving again. Their lives depended not just on action, but on listening to silence. You think about how rare that is now, in a world full of notifications and autoplay. Silence feels awkward, but not here. Here, it's sacred. Even the laughter follows its own rhythm. It doesn't interrupt the silence, it honors it. There's a joke in the tale now: the boy, once he finds his voice, won't stop talking, and the seals start swimming in the other direction. The room chuckles, not loudly, just enough. Then stillness returns, and you love it, because here, silence isn't the end of the story, it's part of the story. You begin to wonder how many tales you've heard tonight without realizing they were teaching you how to listen, not just to words, but to breath, to rhythm, to the space between meanings. The boy in the story returns home, now speaking softly but with intent. He becomes a storyteller, known for his long pauses and short endings. And the tale concludes, not with a declaration, but with a breath. You find yourself breathing with it. By now, the stories have settled into your bones. You're warm, not just from the layers of fur around your shoulders, but from something more internal. You're no longer listening as an outsider. You're within the rhythm now, inside the lull of tale after tale. And here comes another one, casual and quiet, about a man who ties knots into a string every time he learns something new. Hunting techniques, weather signs, the way ptarmigans migrate. He never writes anything down, just knots. And when his grandchildren ask how he knows so much, he hands them the string and says, "Everything's in here." You smile, because you know what he means. It's a story about memory, but also about encoding knowledge in whatever form a person could carry. For the Inuit, oral storytelling wasn't just art, it was data preservation, a way to remember things you couldn't afford to forget. Tonight's tale moves into territory that feels almost modern, a story about a man who falls through the ice and survives because he remembered something he heard in a tale 5 years earlier. He uses his mittens to grip the edge. He lies flat. He crawls, not walks, back to shore. The details are exact, strangely exact. That's no coincidence. Inuit stories often served as survival guides, disguised as entertainment. Want to know where the thin ice is? Listen to the story about the goose who lost its reflection. Want to remember how to build a windbreak? Pay attention to the tale where the fox lives through a storm by stacking snow in a spiral. Fringe anthropologists in the 1970s began calling these functional fictions, not in a dismissive way, but to highlight how stories doubled as tools. A good tale didn't just delight, it equipped. In fact, many Inuit narratives included specific details about landmarks, ice shifts, animal behavior, even ocean currents, and while outsiders might have dismissed them as poetic flourishes, locals knew better. That mention of the seal rock shaped like a sleeping dog, that's real. That's where you find seals in late spring. Historians still debate the extent to which these stories carried coded knowledge. Some argue they were mnemonic devices, a way to pass down environmental data without charts or diagrams. Others claim they were metaphors first, survival tips second, but most agree in a landscape this unforgiving. A story that couldn't help you live wouldn't last long. You're reminded of the tale of the hunter who ignored a spirit's warning not to fish during the red moon. He caught nothing. His sled broke. His dog disappeared. At first, it sounds like a tale about respect, but someone whispers to you afterward, red moon means shifting tides. The warning wasn't magical. It was tidal science wrapped in myth. You glance at the youngest listeners again. They're wide-eyed, sure, but not passive. You can almost see the gears turning. They're cataloging details, testing outcomes in their minds, wondering how these tales might one day save them. And the adults, they're nodding not because it's charming, but because they've used this information. They've followed a trail based on a story's clue. They've avoided danger because a tale warned them, without sounding like a warning. Another story now, a quiet one about a woman who couldn't sleep during the polar night. She wandered, restless, until a dream led her to build her snow shelter facing east instead of west. The next morning, the wind tore through the west-facing shelters. Hers stood firm. Coincidence, maybe, but the story has stuck. And now, whole families build their winter homes slightly tilted, just in case the dream had truth. You realize that these tales don't just help people survive nature, they help people feel in dialogue with it. The land is not just background here, it's a participant, a character, an informant. There's a joke in the room now. Someone jabs a neighbor about not remembering the wind whisper story before taking their snowmobile out last week. The room laughs, but it's a pointed laugh, a reminder, a gentle rebuke dressed as humor. That's another tool these stories wield, social correction. If you break a taboo, the tale doesn't shame you, it includes you. You become the butt of a story. It spreads. People remember. And maybe next time, you'll remember too. You settle deeper into the fur beneath you. The story is wrapping up. The man with the knots in his string is dying now. But he tells his grandson to take the string and keep adding to it, not with fingers, but with memories. The knots aren't for me, he says. They're for you, so you don't forget where the wind turns. That phrase floats in the air, and you understand now. This isn't just culture, it's calibration, a way to keep your mind aligned with the seasons, the sky, the snow, and everything that could go wrong in the blink of a northern night. A story like this, it doesn't just warm you, it equips you. The lamp burns lower now, casting a more golden glow than before, its edges softer, its flicker slower. The circle is smaller too. Some listeners have drifted to the side, curled against the wall in slumber. Children are wrapped in parkas like cocoons. But the stories haven't stopped, if anything. They've deepened. Now comes the hour for the other tales, the ones not told when the sun is up, or when too many young ears are listening. These are the stories wrapped in shadow, slipped between laughter and silence. They're not scandalous or grotesque, but they're layered, personal, haunting. Sometimes you feel the change in the room before a single word is spoken. A new voice speaks, quieter, older. This one tells of a house with whale bones for rafters, bones that creak and groan with old memories. Beneath those ribs, people gather during the polar night, and sometimes they hear voices that aren't part of the story being told. Sometimes they ask questions no one remembers asking, and sometimes they see someone in the circle no one else sees. You shift slightly. These are not horror stories, not in the modern gore and screams sense. They're gentler, sadder, but more lingering. One tale describes a jealous lover who dies in a snowstorm, only to return as a drift of wind that follows his beloved forever. She hears him whenever her fire won't stay lit. Another speaks of a child who never grew old, who still visits his siblings in dreams, asking what happened to his mittens. Fringe collectors of Inuit folklore sometimes dismissed these tales as grief dressed in fiction, but those who lived within the culture knew better. These stories were how communities processed things too big to carry alone: death, loneliness, guilt, disappearance, in a landscape where a single misstep could cost a life. Grief was not rare. It was routine, but it wasn't meant to calcify. So these stories existed to move it, not to erase the pain, but to give it a shape that could be held, told, passed along. And more than that, they created space for ambiguity. Historians still debate whether Inuit spiritual beliefs were structured systems or fluid understandings shaped by region. What's clear is that the line between the living and the spirit world was not sealed shut. It was porous. People talked to the dead, not in ritual, always, but in storytelling, in memory, in pause. Now the story turns to the Taragsuk, shadow people, not ghosts. Exactly. More like echoes, people who live beside us, unseen, occasionally leaving footprints in fresh snow. Some believe they're ancestors, others, unfulfilled wishes. One tale tells of a Taragsuk who follows a hunter for years, leaving hints, saving him from a fall, nudging his sled back on track. You glance toward the door, just for a second. The snow outside seems quiet, still. The tale continues, weaving in and out of memory. You're told of a girl who could hear names whispered on the wind, names of people no one had spoken of in years. Her mother said to ignore them. Her grandfather said to listen closely, because names only drift when they want to return. It's hard to know what's metaphor and what's not, but you're starting to suspect that's the point. And sometimes the stories aren't about ghosts. They're about presence, human presence, a man who knows everyone's secrets but says nothing until the day he dies. And his final words answer questions no one dared ask aloud, or a woman who remembers faces but not names and draws them over and over in snowbanks until her village realizes she's sketching people lost in storms long ago. These stories teach, too. They remind the living to be watchful, gentle, curious, and most of all, humble, because you never know who's listening or remembering. You glance again around the room. No one's speaking, but their eyes say enough. Some are smiling faintly. Others are looking into corners where the lamp doesn't quite reach. It's not fear you feel, it's something quieter, a reverence for things not fully explained. You think about how, in some cultures, Death is kept separate, quarantined in ritual, avoided in everyday speech. But here, it's closer, not normalized exactly, just acknowledged, woven in. The storyteller finishes, simply, no warning, just a line. And if you ever feel a tap on your shoulder when no one's there, smile. It means you're remembered. A long pause. Then someone, softly, yes, and the moment holds, because in this place, under whalebones and snow, not everything needs to be said to be understood. A shift again, this time not in tone, but in tempo. The next storyteller clears their throat with a little flourish, and already the room perks up. You recognize the glint in their eye. It's time to laugh. Not that kind of laughter that bursts out loud, not the slapstick kind. This is the kind that ripples low and warm, the kind that makes you lean against the person next to you because you need them to feel it too. Tonight's next round of tales is a celebration of what might be the most powerful survival tool in the Arctic humor. You might not expect it, after all. The landscape doesn't laugh, the blizzards don't tell jokes, and yet, Inuit stories are rich with laughter, soft, sly, absurd, even gently mocking. Humor wasn't optional in traditional life. It was insulation for the soul. Take, for example, the tale now unfolding. A man who brags that he can hunt a polar bear using only a spoon, not even a sharp one. The story walks through his preparations. He polishes the spoon, consults a dream, prays to a seal skull for guidance. Then, at last, he sets out and promptly loses the spoon. The bear, predictably, is not impressed. He runs home with a single boot, no spoon, and a new respect for silence. The room chuckles. Someone mimics his limp. Even the storyteller struggles to keep a straight face. These kinds of tales are everywhere in the Inuit tradition, mocking arrogance, poking fun at laziness, exaggerating human vanity until it becomes its own punchline. And they're not just for entertainment, they serve a deeper function. In small, interdependent communities, calling someone out directly for their behavior could create tension. So instead, you made a story. A fictional fool did something remarkably similar to what someone real had done yesterday. The lesson landed, the tension dissolved, you'd laugh, you'd nod, you'd change your behavior. No one had to say your name. Fringe anthropologist John Briggs once noted that Inuit communities preferred indirect correction. Humor was how you brought someone back into alignment without pushing them out of the circle. It was a way of saying, you know better, with a smile instead of a scolding. Tonight's tales are rich with these characters. A hunter who keeps falling asleep on guard duty because he dreams he's still awake. A grandmother who tells people she can speak to snowflakes until one of them talks back. A dog who fakes a limp to get extra food, only to be tricked by a fox who does the same. The humor isn't mean, it's communal, shared. Everyone gets to be the fool sometimes. There's even a story about a man who claims he can predict weather by licking his elbow, and for weeks, no one questions it. They just wait. Then a storm comes, and someone asks, "Did you lick today?" He pauses, then answers solemnly, "Only halfway. That's why the storm only hit half the village." The room bursts out laughing. The timing, perfect, but the lesson's there too. Don't pretend to know what you don't. Don't boast unless you're willing to be tested. And you notice, this kind of humor relaxes the group. It allows disagreement without argument. A sideways glance becomes a whole debate. A raised eyebrow is a full critique. One story now is particularly biting. It's about a man who always claims to be busy. Whenever there's work, he's just about to start something else. So one day, a spirit comes along and gives him exactly what he says he wants: endless tasks. He spends eternity digging snow holes that refill themselves every morning. Historians still argue whether this tale was metaphor or satire, but everyone agrees it worked. It reminded listeners that contribution isn't optional, that work, even hard work, is part of keeping the whole alive, even when the stories dealt with serious topics. A laugh was never far. There's one about a woman who loses her husband to the sea and then tells people he left because she snored. It shouldn't be funny, but the way she says it, with a wink and a slap of her knee, makes the grief manageable. The room laughs, not at her, but with her, in support, because here, humor is balm. It keeps nights like this warm. Even when the lamp grows dim, it creates bonds that last longer than storms. And it reminds everyone that no one is above a little gentle teasing, not even the storyteller. The tale wraps with a final line, and that's why we never trust a man with clean boots and a clean conscience. A murmur of laughter circles the room. Someone mutters, "That's my cousin." And the joke grows legs. You smile, because here, in the depth of night, with snow pressing softly against the curved walls, laughter is not a distraction from the cold, it's armor. The room settles once more, laughter fading like the crackle of dying embers. You can feel the difference now, not just in mood, but in posture, in breath, in the soft sigh someone makes as they leans their head against the wall. The stories have done their work, but one more kind is yet to come. You recognize it immediately. A different kind of tale, one where the voice drops lower, not conspiratorial, more reverent. This is not just a story for entertainment. This is a telling with weight behind it. The storyteller begins with a simple phrase. It must be told like this. You straighten a little. Tonight's tale is one that was once reserved for ceremony, not always sacred in the way outsiders think of ritual, but important, precise. These weren't the tales you told just because the stew was hot and everyone was bored. These were stories that were timed, positioned, invited. Some only told during winter, some only after someone passed, some only when strangers were present, as a way to share identity, not secrets. The story tonight is about the origin of the first kayak. You might think it's a technical tale, a how-to, but instead, it's poetic. A man dreams of gliding across water like a seal. He tries building a boat of ice, fails, of driftwood, sinks. He finally stretches skin over whalebone, and in that moment, he no longer paddles, he becomes the sea. The people in the story don't just invent, they become. Tools are not separate, they are extensions. The kayak, the harpoon, the dog sled, they all come with spirit, with story, with a path. Inuit culture doesn't divide the practical from the spiritual the way many other societies do. A drum isn't just a drum, it's a voice. A fire isn't just warmth, it's a keeper of stories. And storytelling itself, it's never just narrative, it's participation in something older than memory. Historians still argue whether these ceremonial stories were passed in fixed forms or if they evolved with each generation. Some accounts suggest rigid phrasing, others describe them as fluid, layered, responsive to the mood and the moon and the breath of the speaker. And yet, despite variation, the function was the same: to reinforce connection to each other, to the land, to time. You hear it clearly in the tale. The storyteller describes how the man in the kayak becomes lost in fog, but instead of panicking, he paddles in rhythm with the waves. He listens, he watches the birds, he sings the name of his mother over and over until the fog parts. His return isn't triumphant, it's quiet. His village doesn't cheer. They greet him with tea. Someone offers him dried fish. Then they say, "You remembered how to come back," that line. You remembered how to come back. It rings differently. It feels like a spell. You begin to see how these stories were more than moral instruction or entertainment. They held the architecture of belonging. They mapped where you came from, where you were going, what paths were safe, and which ones were sacred. There's another tale now. This one about a woman who sings to whales, not for food, but to let them know she respects them. Her voice is not beautiful by human standards, but the whales love it. When others scoff, she stops singing. The whales stop coming. It isn't until she sings again, this time with no audience, that they return. A reminder: do the thing for its own sake, not for applause. This tale, too, was once told only during a particular moon cycle, a ceremonial story, one meant to realign people with practice. You don't sing to get, you sing to be. You look around. The listeners are still, not sleepy, attentive. There's a respect here that doesn't need announcing. No one crosses their arms. No one interrupts. They know this kind of story asks for presence, not just ears. You reflect on how, in so many cultures, rituals have been severed from story, split apart. But here, they remain twined. A tale about how to hunt is also a prayer. A story about returning is also a map. A joke is also a rule. There's even a tale now being told, softly, about two siblings who build snow houses facing opposite directions. They fight, they part, years pass, then one day, the wind turns and makes both their doors face the same way again. They meet in the middle. They don't speak, they just share food. It's about forgiveness, but also about wind and time and doorways. It's about everything, really. As the tale ends, no one moves. The silence afterward is long, but not empty. It feels ceremonial in itself, the way a bowl, when finally emptied, still feels full in the hand. The storyteller nods once. That's it. That's the end. And just like that, you understand this wasn't just a night of stories. It was a night of belonging. The snow outside continues its slow descent. Though you can't hear it, nothing out there makes a sound anymore. But in here, within this soft circle of fur, warmth, and voice, something more than sound still moves. The next story begins without announcement. The storyteller is older, not just in years, but in presence. They carry the air of someone who has told this tale more times than they can count. And yet, the telling is fresh. The words have weight, as though they're being shaped just now, just for this room. The tale is familiar, not because you've heard it, but because it's been hinted at all night. It's one of the foundational ones, a story that gets told again and again. But here's the thing, it's never told the same way twice. This aversion begins with the land itself, flat and bright and endless. A man sets out on a journey. He's not lost, but he doesn't know where he's going either. The story doesn't rush to explain. Instead, it meanders, like wind curling through tundra, along the way. The man meets a fox who asks him a riddle, then a bird who speaks in proverbs, then a glacier that growls in its sleep. Each gives him a different version of what the world means. Each version is true and not. And that's the heart of the story truth shifts. You feel it, sitting here. This tale is more than a sequence of events. It's a structure, an opportunity to reflect, reinterpret, reweave. That's what makes it ceremonial. What makes it sacred isn't that it's unchanged, but that it's meant to change. You begin to see the craft of it. The storyteller is making subtle adjustments to reflect who's in the room. That reference to the quiet girl by the door, that's not in the old versions, but it belongs here, now. That line about the sled dog that always ran sideways, that's someone's memory, tucked gently into the narrative. This adaptability wasn't just artistry, it was survival. Inuit stories had to stretch across generations, geography, dialects. To last, they had to breathe. Historians still argue whether this narrative fluidity weakened the authenticity of oral tradition. But that's only if you believe a story's strength lies in sameness. Here, strength lies in relevance. One version of tonight's story might emphasize the glacier's wisdom. Another might lean into the fox's joke. Yet another could reshape the ending entirely. Maybe the man never returns. Maybe the journey is the point. You watch the storyteller's hands, which barely move, just small motions, one finger twitch, one wrist tilt, like they're sketching the story midair, allowing it to hang above you, all like mist. There's a beautiful moment the man in the story lies down in exhaustion, not because he's failed, but because he knows he can go no farther without becoming someone else first. He sleeps. He dreams he's a caribou. He wakes up lighter, quieter, changed. And so the tale goes on. There's no climax, no twist, no high drama, but you can feel the room leaning in, fully tuned. Every listener here has heard this tale before, in some version, and yet everyone is waiting for what it might be this time. That's what makes it sacred. One elder once said, if you tell the same story the same way every time, it will stop listening to you. That phrase stayed with you. It flips the dynamic. Stories aren't just told by people, they respond. They require attention, like a fire, like a friend. Quirky detail in some communities. There was a belief that stories themselves had ears, that they didn't like being rushed, that if you told a story too fast or while angry, it would leave parts out on purpose. It wouldn't come back to you the same. So storytellers learned patience and reverence. The story now nears its quiet conclusion. The man returns, not to where he started, but to where he belongs, which, in this telling, is a different place entirely. He doesn't explain where he's been. He simply begins building a home, one wall at a time, facing the wind, facing the sunrise, and the final line he knew the snow wouldn't stop, but he'd stopped fearing it. The storyteller says it softly, as though exhaling it. No reaction in the room, not at first. Then someone nods. Someone else breathes deeply. The kind of breath you take when something lands inside you. You look around. No one's ready to sleep yet. But no one needs another story right now either. The room holds this one, cradles it, and you realize the power of this kind of storytelling isn't just in what's said, it's in how it's carried forward, not just retold, but retuned. And tomorrow, when the sun is low and the wind cuts across the tundra, someone will remember one line differently, and that difference will become the next version, and the story will still be listening. You don't notice at first that no new voice has begun a story. The last tale still lingers too vividly. Everyone sits quietly, not in waiting, but in something closer to gratitude. The Kulik's flame has shrunk. Its light curls low on the floor now, making the firs look like waves. The circle is hushed, not from exhaustion, but from fullness, like the stories themselves are resting now, too, eventually. Someone speaks, not with a new tale, but with a soft humming. Just a few notes, a rhythm that resembles nothing in particular and yet matches everything. It doesn't fill the silence, it joins it. This moment, wordless, shared, is just as much a part of the tradition as any legend, because not all Inuit stories were told aloud. Some were gestured, some were sung, some were left half told, finished only in dreams or in decisions made the next day. And that's the beauty of oral culture, its openness, its willingness to leave the edge of the map unfinished. There's a story, someone finally says, that no one ever finishes. They start it, always, when the sea ice begins to break. The first half is told during the last night of deep winter, and the second half, that part is never spoken. The children are told, "You will live it." You think about that, about the faith it takes to believe that a tale doesn't need an ending to have meaning, that the living of it, that breathing it into action is enough. Tonight's storytelling began with myth and mischief. It moved through memory, teaching, grief, humor, ceremony, and now, here at the end, it becomes something more ephemeral, something not meant to be written down or quoted later, but held. And across this room, this warm, circular womb of snow and story, you feel that everyone is holding it together. You remember a line from earlier in the night, something about a child walking backward through a storm so they wouldn't recognize their fear. That story, disguised as a parable, suddenly feels like a philosophy. And maybe that's what all of this has been. Philosophy in parka hoods, wisdom wrapped in seal oil and laughter, knowledge passed between breaths, between bites of dried fish, between moments of eye contact in a room of drifting flame. Historians often try to record stories like these, transcribe them, print them, annotate their motifs, and yet the essence always slips through because you had to be there. You had to see the way the storyteller's voice dipped, the way a joke landed so quietly it could only be heard in shared memory. You had to feel the timing, the glances, the silences pregnant with meaning. You had to notice the child mimicking an owl's blink, or the teenagers smiling quietly when their own story made it into someone else's tale. These weren't just performances, they were blueprints for how to feel, how to listen, how to stay warm, not just in body, but in spirit. The final story of the night, though no one calls it that, is one you don't even hear. It's in the way the circle begins to stretch, people yawning softly, leaning into sleep. Someone places a hand on a shoulder. Someone tucks a blanket around a dozing child. No formal goodbye. No, that's the end. just breath, just rest. And then, only then, do you realize Inuit storytelling wasn't designed to end at all. It was designed to carry. So you carry it. You lie back. The furs shift beneath you. The lamp flickers one last time. And in your mind, you hear that seal song again. The one that sounded like sorrow and hope braided together. The one you can't hum, but somehow already remember. The night has grown long and still. The stories drift into sleep, into snow, into the quiet folds of dreams. And now, the stories are quiet. The lamp has gone out. The circle has gently unraveled, and the night presses softly against the walls of the igloo. You lie still beneath layers of fur, your breath slowing to match the rhythm of memory. In the stillness, your body remembers the cadence of voices, the rise and fall of tales passed from one heart to another. It doesn't matter if the words are fading now. They've done their work. They've smoothed the edges of thought. They've braided meaning into silence. You imagine the snow outside piling gently, slowly reshaping the land as you rest. Nothing urgent, nothing harsh, just the calm continuation of a world in motion, in this moment. The cold does not reach you in this moment. The long night does not feel long. Your mind drifts across the stories: the boy who never spoke, the raven who tricked himself, the singing woman who welcomed back the whales. They arrive not in sentences now, but in sensations: a soft laugh, a shimmering shadow, a pause that says more than explanation ever could. And if your dreams come wrapped in fur and flickering light, if they carry the echo of a sea goddess's sigh or a child's whispered question, let them, let the stories follow you, quietly, like snow foxes at the edge of a camp. No need to chase them. They'll be there when you wake. For now, rest. The story is still listening.